live. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I'm here with Tom Davenport and Ian Barkin. And the way we like to do these events, which we do once a month, is to jump right in, especially since this is LinkedIn Live. After all, you have ready access to our LinkedIns if perhaps you're not familiar with Tom and Ian. Quick version is Tom, of course, has written many books in the data space, so you're probably quite familiar with him. And Ian and I have both done LinkedIn learning courses. That's how we first encountered each other. So I want to kind of start this off in a way that we can get folks acclimated, but come at it from a slightly different angle than perhaps just introducing yourself, followed by overviewing the book. What I want to talk about is the fact that, much of this conversation isn't new. The citizen data scientist thing, I was double checking the dates. I think Gartner usually gets the credit for the phrase 2016. If my research is correct, somebody might find a site from earlier than that. But I think what the two of you really innovated with the book, All Hands on Tech, of course, is the book we're talking about.
Yay.
Okay. Because you both have multiple books. I think what you've really innovated is bringing citizen automation and citizen data science under the same umbrella. So I'm curious about when that conversation happened. I'm guessing probably at either an article that you each read of the other because you started co-authoring articles before the book, or perhaps at a conference, something like that. How did that conversation start, that this was really part of the same movement?
Do you remember, Ian, when it started? I'm not sure. I do. I was always interested in data science, so I think, brought the citizen data science thing to the table, but Ian was more the automation guy.
Yeah, I mean, Tom and I have known each other for many years. He and my co-founder of my last venture co-authored a piece on the importance of process and actually focusing on what really matters when you're looking at automation. And we sort of stayed in touch. As Tom said, my background was more in the automation side, more in the robotic process automation side. And what we collectively saw and discussed together over time was this direction of travel towards easier, not necessarily easiest or even easy yet, but easier. It's easier for people to start to play with these technologies and turn ideas into actions. And as we explored it, we realized that applies across a spectrum. So it wasn't just data science. It wasn't just process automation. It was kind of all of it. And that is what sparked our interest in doing some research, which turned into those two journal articles that you mentioned that then blossomed into a whole book. Boom. Look at that. Sound effects too. Amazing. I think you will determine sooner than later, Keith, that Tom and I get along very well and that we have a chemistry on these things that is fun.
I've heard a bit of some of the work that you're preparing for the conversation today. I wanted to mix up the questions a little bit, so I've tried to get a little bit of a sense of the conversations you've had with others since the book came out in October, and I enjoyed the light comedy interspersed quite a bit. So I'm glad that it's continuing today. A quick bit of logistics. I just want to greet everybody. So we're in StreamYard. Of course, we know that our audience might not. So they're more than likely joining us on LinkedIn, but conceivably on Further's YouTube channel and so on. So I want to invite everybody just to kind of tell us that you're out there and where you're joining us from. Also, I'd love to have audience questions. We'll focus on some of my prepared questions for the first 30 or 40 minutes, but I'd love to take some audience questions later. So if you care to, please tell us where you're joining from. So Ian, a quick follow-up on that last question. Is the phrase citizen automation a common one? And if so, for how long?
No, not really, but it was our focus on being specific and crisp with our vocabulary actually had us exploring a whole spectrum of citizenry throughout the course of our brainstorming and research. And there were a lot of citizen types that we we thought of and then ended up on the cutting room floor just for the sake of clarity and reduced complexity. But ultimately, the question was, okay, you can automate some stuff. How would you use this technology? It's either to replace APIs and create better integrations between applications, which felt a lot like my heritage in the robotic process automation space. And that was automation. So we called that automator or automation. There's other areas of automation where people were building sort of more comprehensive applications of capability. So it was a tool that helped you with supply chain logistics and shipping of goods or onboarding of employees. That wasn't a glue between apps. That was as close to an app as you could get. In fact, they were apps. So that was where we left Citizen Developer to really represent that. Although Citizen Developer was also sort of the umbrella term we explain in the book as, look, it's not perfect, but it speaks to all three. And then Citizen Data Scientist is Tom's world. So I will not dare speak for him. He knows far better than I. But that was another class of citizenry, but in this case, playing with data.
Well, and in that space, Keith, I mean, you're right that it was identified a long time ago, but I don't think it has really taken off even as much as citizen automation has, because historically, at least, in order to do it well, you had to have a pretty strong statistical background. And I think AI has changed that. Automated machine learning changed it before generative AI came along, and then generative AI has made it even easier. I mean, it still helps, obviously, to know something about how the statistics work behind a particular data science model that you're creating, but you don't really need to know it anymore. And if it's a non-business critical or life critical kind of analysis you're doing, if it's something for marketing or something like that, who cares if it's not perfect? Most marketing initiatives are not very well personalized or tailored anyway, so we're not really moving toward a workplace.
And this is where the marketers turned against us.
Yeah, I'm going to come at the, because remember, I'm a data scientist, so in multiple interviews, Ian, you talked about the risk of eye rolling, and I sometimes run that risk myself as a data scientist. But I think what you tackle really successfully in the book is this whole issue of what we would worry about more and what we would worry about less, right? And let's just accept the fact that this is happening, start to address it. And again, I think that's where the innovation of putting this under one umbrella is, I think, a real contribution, because even if 5 years ago we weren't talking about citizen automation and citizen data scientists as being similar, the way that we would govern both of them possibly is similar, right? And if it turns out that way, then I think that'll be a real contribution. So on this theme of what stresses out senior leadership more and what stresses them out less, I thought it would be interesting to start with what I would argue is the least controversial one of this, and one that I hadn't heard of until the book, and that's the Citizen Scout. So either one of you can take that, perhaps whichever one of you decided when you were narrowing down the taxonomy that Citizen Scout was going to survive and not be a cutting room.
I think that was Ian's idea.
This is an easy question, so I'll take this one. We'll save the harder ones for Tom. But back to that spectrum of, okay, there's contributions that employees across an enterprise can have given these technologies as they've advanced and gotten easier. We say that humans are getting more technical and technology is becoming more human. And so there were the automators, the developers, and the data scientists. But in several discussions that we had with champions of citizenry within enterprises, there was a recognition that you would put teams through this early stage of introduction training as to what it is that these tools could do and where they might be able to be used within an enterprise to add value. And one gentleman actually said he didn't even care if people failed that training and didn't go all the way through, because they were still useful ambassadors of the concept. And so they, within their own realm.
That was Max Siaffi, wasn't it? Yeah, it's funny. I talked to him last week, and he said he thinks that citizen ambassador role has turned out to be the most valuable of them, and he's really focusing on that more than anything else.
Which I could see. I mean, ultimately, the way we sort of flippantly thought of it is, it's just the people who are capable of pointing out where things are painful, where things just aren't great, or they stink, right? And so they aren't complainers. They are actually visionaries, if you will, who are serving as scouts to say, over here is a good place to start to find ways to incorporate the technologies available to us to make it better. And so, yes, so it was Max from Wesco who in his training recognized, at very least, I've got scouts. I got people out there now looking and thinking, because we've provided them this new lens of what is possible. And once you have that lens, frankly, I don't think you can look at a process without identifying a friction or an inefficiency or just a straight up pain that can't be addressed with some form of technology. And in many cases, technology that's easy enough for citizens to design and deploy.
And I think you could argue that even if you're very risk averse and you think that every application or automation or data science model needs to have a professional involved at some point, you could say that one of the biggest contributions of the kind of citizen movement is these things can now be much more collaborative than they used to. And, we've always had this gap between the technology professionals and the business people, and they don't understand each other, and they badmouth each other, and one throws something over the wall to the other, and it doesn't get created in a way that reflects their needs very well. And we don't have to do things that way anymore.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the shocking statistics of percentage of digital transformations that fail is rarely, if ever, because of the technology chosen. It's all to do with the stakeholders and the communication, the dynamics, and that all harkens back to that oil water problem that Tom just highlighted, that organizational units don't communicate. Now, we had discussions with people who said that in meetings, they weren't sure who was on which team anymore, that the business users were so fluent in technical speak that they may as well have been part of the tech team. And that's, again, humans becoming more technical and the technology becoming easier for domain experts to employ and use in their own design and development.
Well, yeah, you had a graphic in a webinar that the two of you did that showed that technical software was getting less techy and humans were getting more techy. And where they met was the citizen revolution, if I remember that.
Right. It's that inflection point. I do have to thank you for being like the one person who's watched all these things too. This is outstanding.
Well, I have to.
You're a biggest fan, Keith.
So I've been watching them during meals, but I've enjoyed it. So getting back to this citizen scout business, I just want to share my enthusiasm for this because I think this is really critical. So you were talking about the fact that because I've been on a lot of these data science projects. I mean, projects that actually made it to deployment, which if you read the literature, almost never happens, and I've seen it happen multiple times, right? So I think that the threat to deployment, I've been saying this for years, I just don't have the evidence for it, is organizational resistance. Okay, so if the citizen scout, as you refer to them in the book, is an end user of one kind or another. In other words, they're going to be the person within the organization that's actually going to use it. They are the ones that are usually responsible for the organizational resistance because the so-called data science experts come up with some idea that they were asked to look into by senior management, and they immediately go into their technical tools and don't talk to anybody. And then they produce this solution that's ill-fitting and that nobody wants. And then it gets rejected by the folks that were supposed to be the users of it. So if that end user is also a citizen scout, it could be an extremely powerful way of combating that problem.
Right. They're pre-primed. They're geared up for it, excited by it. The only challenge being in any sort of on any training effort that I ever took part in was the cautionary tale of when you do enable them with that knowledge, with that lens, you better do something about it and go into a comment box and die. You've lost that contingent of enterprise support.
Well, and that delay, I have another question queued up that I want to ask, but at some point we should talk about the delay that you talk about in the book, because gosh, I've got to think, if someone puts in a request and they're told that it's going to be 6 or 12 or 18 months before anybody addresses it, you can imagine why this happens in the shadows, if not out in the open, because that's too long to wait. Now, as a data scientist, I've got to say that it's not clear to me that data scientists should report up through IT either, right? So conceivably, where this lands is something like a center of excellence, and you've talked about that kind of option a little bit. But having introduced what, again, I would argue might be the least controversial version of this, the Citizen Scout, because really, if it's done well, who could argue with the Citizen Scout, right? You identify a problem, and then if need be, you involve the experts, right?
Right.
And again, if there's a center of excellence where some of those experts live, and there's a place to go, and the queue isn't 18 months long, right? Then that in and of itself is a real contribution. You could probably do a whole article if you're, I don't know how long your list of tentative articles is, right? You're probably 6 or 12 or 18 months out in terms of getting articles out. But I think I think that's worthy of an article just in itself, the whole idea of the Citizen Scout. So let's turn to at least a little bit more controversial, and something, of course, that kind of hits home to me as a data scientist. This is something that's been on my mind over the many years that we've been talking about citizen data science too. I mentioned deployed models, and that's where I've always gotten a little nervous when the model is deployed, because even as a data scientist, you're expected to work with MLOps engineers and data engineers and so on when you go to deployment. So I can't imagine how a citizen data scientist would navigate that when I find it challenging, and you have all these specialties where even someone like me isn't expected necessarily to get into the MLOps stuff. There's supposed to be a handshake there because that's a different skill set, and they're supposed to pursue that. So maybe one of the two of you or both could tackle this 2 types of data scientists that you talk about, because I thought that was extremely helpful too. I think that was the dichotomy that I was waiting for, because you get the folks saying citizen data science is happening, and then you get the eye roll, Ian, that you often refer to. And I think by splitting this into 2, that too has been a real contribution to the conversation, I think.
Well, yeah, and the quote that best exemplifies that eye roll is from a head of data science at a health insurance company, who said, when asked, what do you think about citizen data science? He said, we prefer not to put sharp knives in the hands of children. But even he admitted that the knives that children have access to are getting sharper and sharper all the time. These are, knives like Click and Tableau and so on that I'm sure most data scientists thought were way too dull to be risky, but they'll do machine learning now, and we'll see more and more of that happen with generative AI. And so I think that no offense to you, Keith, I'm sure you're not like this at all, but data scientists have been somewhat resistant in many cases to engaging heavily with the business. They care about algorithms, they care about cool algorithms, interesting algorithms, things that they don't have to do every day. And many business people don't care so much about algorithms. They just want to get their problem addressed. And so I think in many cases, just as we talked about it in other aspects of IT, the best situation would be where you have somebody develops something on their own, maybe they're somewhat quantitatively oriented, but certainly not a data scientist, and then they take it to the data scientists who want to engage with business people and say, what do you think? Does this make sense? Is there a way we need to refine this? And I think that, as you suggested, Keith, the movement, data science was initially a sort of a unicorn activity. There was only one person who did it from start to finish, and we found out that a lot of models didn't get deployed as a result. So we added machine learning engineers and data engineers and so on. And I think adding, quantitatively sophisticated, or at least quantitatively interested business people to those teams who understand the business problem and how to address it is something that I'm seeing more and more of, particularly in these whether you call them data product teams or digital product teams or whatever, a group of people all united with the idea that we're going to create a successful outcome using data and analytics and various other tools to get the job done. And I think that's good for everybody. It makes the data scientists much less sort of purely algorithm focused, and makes the machine learning engineers a little less sort of, how do I just scale this model focused. Everybody's united in solving the business problem.
Well, thank you for giving me the out that not all data scientists make that mistake. But certainly, there's other issues too. More than one data scientist has probably been accused of being a prima donna, almost like, why all I need is the data and my algorithms, right? There's certainly that phenomenon out there.
It's partially my fault, because I did write an article with the subtitle "Sexiest Job of the 21st Century."
A very, very famous phrase, as we all know. But I would have forgotten to bring that up. But you're right. Yes. So possibly you get some of the credit for that hubris that we experience with some data scientists.
I keep constantly telling the data scientists, look, it's sexiest job, not sexiest people.
Nice.
Well,
and that's why he's so popular.
Keith, but...
So subject matter experts, I think, are an important part of the story today, or we have to pronounce it SME at least once, because our head of data science and AI, Cal Dubabe, hates when we pronounce it SME. So I'm doing that for Cal's benefit. But subject matter experts are prominent in the book, and they're some of the folks that become citizens. Certainly, I want to ask about that, but I want to come at this from a different angle. So I've always thought, in terms of this, what you call in the book data science analysis versus true data science, right? That it gets at the issue that I've been worried about, which is I want as many people in the organization involved in analyzing data as possible, because I think everybody agrees that that's a healthy thing. It's just people probably only differ where to draw the line. But again, deployed models make me a little nervous. And I think I have a way at coming at that, because you mentioned that data science analysis, for instance, can include things like teams or individuals doing their own dashboards. So I've always thought what you call data science analysis, if we only called it citizen business intelligence, it would be possibly more descriptive and possibly less threatening. So let me throw a graphic out here. I'm doing this kind of informally. Last month, we talked to Donald Farmer, and I don't know if you know Donald, but he's a thought leader in the space, been around for many years, and did a lot of work at Microsoft and Click, running product management teams. So largely been in the BI space. So he gave a talk at a conference recently, and here's a graphic. I could have tried to put this up there, but what it is, it's showing that you've got strategic decisions that are made infrequently, usually by senior management. Then you've got tactical, well, I guess I could keep it up there for another second. Tactical made more like at the team level by middle management. And then operational would be things, I think you've used this phrase before, Tom. If I'm not quoting you, I'm quoting one of our colleagues, micro decisions. So operational things would be credit card fraud, all that kind of stuff that's happening all the time. I think so. It's coming at it from a different way, but what you're calling data science analysis and true data science comes pretty close, I thought, to the safer being the tactical at the team level versus the operational, which gets automated, fewer eyes are on it. If the model's not working right, it can get you into a lot of trouble. Do you think I'm on to something here? Do you think there's this, the distinction you make in the book, is it all similar to the distinction that I'm making?
Well, I think there is a relationship there. I mean, I do think that subject matter experts on, I don't know, fraudster behavior, for example, would be very useful to have on a team developing fraud models, even though, you know, they may not understand either the algorithms in detail or the, you know, how to embed it into all of your transactional systems and so on. But probably more involvement on the tactical decisions in developing, you know, an initial model, at least maybe a good enough model to deploy it. And even on the strategic side, I think, although many of those strategic decisions don't always involve enough data to do any kind of model, I think having kind of people who understand a bit about the business issue and how to develop potential solutions for it on the team would be very, very helpful. Even I was reading an article draft this morning about chief strategy officers and how AI can really change the role of that sort of person. And they've been very, I think, non-quantitative for the most part. This article was proposing that they become more data-driven and analytical and AI-based on a lot of their a lot of the issues they address. And I think that should be true, as you suggested, Keith, of almost everybody in the organization. They should move in that direction.
You know, it's Ian, I want you to have a chance to respond too, but it's interesting that you mentioned the strategic decisions, because Donald's take on it was similar, arguing that that kind of C-suite level decision involves conversations with the C-suite at other companies. It involves anecdotal information all folded in. So it's kind of tough probably for data science or BI to completely fuel those decisions, since so much of it is anecdotal.
Yeah, it is getting easier though. You know, generative AI is pretty good at, you know, summarizing anecdotal conversations and comments by customers and so on. So, you know, I think they should add that to their portfolio of tools.
Also interesting that you mentioned the chief strategy officer in this context, because that's who I think data science should report to. Just as an aside, I would love to see data science and predictive analytics report up through strategy, or maybe the COO and not the CIO.
Yeah, there have been a few examples of that I've seen. At one point, it was true at Walmart, for example. But I don't know. I always say every organizational structure contains the seeds of its own destruction, and you know, the seeds are different depending on the reporting relationship. Ultimately, I think it matters more the quality and attributes of the individual to whom you report rather than the role. Some CIOs are great, some are lousy, and you know, there may be some patterns there, certainly.
Ian, what's your take on that whole safe data science versus risky data science?
Well, I'm reflecting on the chief strategy officer concept because I was one several times in my career. I'm not sure that I was sophisticated enough to be even remotely responsible for a data science team. But I do think, again, the nature of a growing fluency across all functions in the basics that make up data and automation is imperative. It is happening. And so I don't know, if I rewound the clock 10 years, well, if I was a chief strategy officer today, would I do things differently than I did 10 years ago? Most likely. I'd count on you to help me both of you to help me figure out just how data plays into this, but it is becoming easier and easier to use some of the tools that we found in our interviews with folks who, again, they were domain experts. They understood their field. They might not have been PhDs in data, right? They weren't math geeks. They just knew, as Tom said, they might know what the telltale signs of fraud look like, or they understood shipping better than anyone else because they started their career in a loading dock. And that's the sort of capabilities you didn't tap into as easily before because of the class system between the data jocks or the IT folks and the doers.
Folks like that make amazing data scientists, by the way, if they end up switching mid-career. Like a claims adjuster that becomes a data scientist,
right?
Or
right.
an engineer that becomes a data scientist,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So
right.
I mean, some of the most amazing data scientists I know fall into that category. Mm-hmm. To briefly revisit your role as a CSO, hopefully you'd have a senior data scientist reporting to you that you trusted, right? And whoever that senior data scientist was probably wouldn't want to debate all the algorithms, which they love to take ownership over anyway. They probably wouldn't have wanted to debate that with you. But I think a CSO is in a great position to set priorities for that team. I think the difference can be that reporting up through a CSO, hopefully analytics becomes a profit center. How can we get value out of the data rather than it being a cost center? When it comes up through IT, I don't know if both of you have found this to be true in your interviews, but when data science reports up through IT, it tends to be how many software packages are we supporting, and what's the cost, and what's our licenses, and all those kinds of things. And that's not the interesting part of the conversation. The interesting part of the conversation is if we can get $10 million worth of value out of a good data science project, more than likely that's going to pay for our software license.
That's fair.
I would call those bad CIOs, but to me, the much more common reporting relationship now is to chief data and analytics and increasingly AI officers. And the good ones there are increasingly focused on, how do we get value out of data? And in many cases, that's by using analytics and AI to make sense of it and to change the business. But sometimes those chief data and analytics officers report to CIOs as well. But you'd hope they'd be business transformation oriented CIOs, not sort of keep the lights on and keep the costs down kind of CIOs.
Right. Well, in this day and age too, all roads lead through data. And so the roles that they have to play are just imperative to any of this AI agent topic that Tom and I are doing a lot of research on right now. And this concept of agentics, it's all hinging on data because it's irrelevant what you can build and how exciting it is if it doesn't have the food to feed it and give it the information that it needs to actually transact and do something useful for the enterprise. So data, it is important, apparently.
In fact, we've transformed ourselves into AI agents now.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Tom and I aren't even here. This is all Sora, ChatGPT videos.
We've been agenticized.
That's right.
How convenient.
Yeah.
That release came a few days prior to today, freed up your schedules a little bit.
That's right. I mean, for those watching who don't know us, we are nowhere near this handsome in real life. It's the AI that's made us look this way.
Well, if your avatars could kindly thank the real Tom and Ian, I would appreciate it very much. Tom, I agree with you about all CIOs obviously aren't the same, and we don't want to paint with too broad a brush there. But I don't think it's unrelated to the citizen revolution as you describe it in general, because if I recall, Mr. Citizen, which is an interesting story all by itself, was an Alteryx user, right? And very often it's like, oh, we already have SQL and Python. We don't want to support tools like that. I bet there's plenty of citizens that get a license on their own first, or sneak it into an expense report or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised actually if you'd heard some anecdotes about.
I'm simply shocked that you would suggest such a thing, Keith.
No, beyond the pale.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of that going on. And in many organizations, I think it's when enough people try this and find that it makes them really productive, the organization says, well, maybe that Alteryx license or whatever is not too expensive after all. Let's bring it in. Mr. Citizen's organization did not come to that realization. Maybe we should explain the Mr. Citizen story.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy use of a few minutes. And if you happen to know how, like, if he did feel forced to do that initially, like get his own license or or something like that, we don't want to get Mr. Citizen into even more trouble, as you'll, I'm sure, explain. There's a reason why there's a pseudonym. But maybe Tom, maybe you can bring everybody up to date on the story.
Sure. Yeah, I actually thought, well, maybe people have figured out who Mr. Citizen is, but it turns out if you Google it, it says Mr. Citizen is Harry Truman. So we did not have Harry Truman in mind.
Oh gosh.
But Mr. Citizen was a supply chain expert within a consumer products company who discovered, he worked a lot on demand planning, and demand planning, you have to integrate a lot of different data sources. And he discovered that Alteryx was really great for doing this. It saved huge amounts of time. And so he started to use it. And the IT people were, let's just say, not very supportive of him. His company did get a new CIO who was a little bit more supportive of the idea of various approaches to citizen development. But let's just say, although I thought he was quite reasonable in the things that he said publicly about the IT organization, and sometimes they helped him and so on, in general, it wasn't 100% positive. And so the PR people in Mr. Citizen's company said, if you publish his name or our name, we will sue you. So he became Mr. Citizen as a result.
Yeah. Well, and I doubt you're going to. I doubt that subpoena is really coming, but
it might increase sales of the book if they did sue us. People say it must be pretty interesting if somebody's willing to sue you for it.
Yeah, but it does underscore, I think, what it's like for folks that are trying to do something like that. So to stay on this for a moment, Ian, maybe you can pick up this part of the, tie it into another topic that I wanted to talk about. The two of you sometimes use this distinction of me projects versus we projects,
right?
Which also I thought really got at the heart of what would make senior leadership more or less nervous. Right. And on my read, I mean, of Mr. Citizen's story, it seemed like most of what he was doing fell into that me category.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and this goes back through my entire experience with the robotic process automation space too, is some of the earliest champions of the space, practitioners, adopters of it, would stand on stage and say to an audience full of human beings, my IT department doesn't even know I'm doing this, which I used to get a kick out of. But that was the very definition of effectively a me scope of work, where you'd, as you said, you'd go and you'd buy some automation software on your own credit card somehow, or within your division's budget or department's budget, and you'd play with data and systems that you had some sort of remit over. And IT would eventually find out and get really disgruntled and try to take ownership of it. This citizenry thing is nothing more than people who care about what they do are initially those scouts that identify that there are better ways to do it and have the tenacity and ingenuity to do something about it. And that's where a lot of these, and this is where a lot of our framework and a lot of our assertion is this is already happening in your enterprise. People are already doing it because they care, not that they're trying to defraud or trying to destroy or disrupt. They're actually trying to digitize and transform. And a lot of times that counts on them hiding it, which means it's a me project for the most part. Because once it's a we project, and what we mean by we project is it crosses boundaries. Maybe it's a transaction that involves the finance team and the product team or the sales team or the supply chain team or legal, or lo and behold, even more broadly involves one of your upstream partners or your customer, those become more complex. Those cross a bunch of different systems. They do certainly touch regulatory considerations. But the sandbox of, if it's something you do and you know you can do it better, then kind of knock yourself out. We should be enabling you to exercise those ideas and stretch those muscles and start to become a citizen over scopes that you have control over. And some enterprises encourage it. There are frameworks that recognize and reward and enable that. Sometimes they find out sort of after the fact. To make my answer even longer, there was one client where a CIO was shocked to find that a bunch of people were developing things in a me project kind of way, and was more shocked when they realized that the reason was because they signed a new Office 365 corporate license that gave everybody Copilot. And so, unbeknownst to that person, they actually unleashed this thing into the organization. So it wasn't as nefarious as me buying a rogue license on my credit card. You actually gave it to all of us who just didn't know you had done that.
Or even before Copilot, the Power Platform enabled
right.
all those activities, which it's also in some organizations, some Microsoft licenses. And, when you have the world's biggest software company developing a whole suite of tools for doing citizen-oriented work, from citizen development to citizen automation to citizen data science, and the CEO of that company publicly speaking, writing about how important this is, it's going to happen. It's not going to be prevented.
And why on earth wouldn't you want to tap into domain expertise in the ingenuity of the team you have today, especially in light of the fact that the supply-demand gap of people with technical skills and your need for technical programs is massive. And no matter who you quote, there were statistics we found everywhere we looked about the massive gap in technical talent that enterprises would need to do digital transformation. Citizens are coming to fill that gap. And they're coming with their own understanding of their own field of work, which is invaluable, because just because you know Python doesn't mean you know supply chain. And so tap into those domain experts to really transform, come up with the ideas, and then execute on them.
I want to talk about, I have more questions than I have time left to ask, but I want to talk a little bit about who's doing we projects well. So that's kind of in the queue, but I want to ask first about low code, no code. So I know, Tom, that you've talked about this for quite some time, well before the book. You had an article come out in 21, but I'm sure you were talking about it before that. My own experience with low code, no code goes quite far back, because what was initially called Clementine and is now the IBM product came out in version 1 in 94. And I started using it within 5 or 6 years after that. And SPSS, even older. We were talking before we went live about SAS, which is down the road for me. And that's also been around for a long, long time. So my own take on this, I'm very curious to know, since you've done all of these interviews, how rare this take is. It feels like it's a little bit rare. Is that I think that low code, no code is a really powerful tool for so-called experts. I'm almost at the 30-year mark. I hope I'm almost there, qualifying for that title. I love low code, no code tools because I can work faster that way. And for me, they ease collaboration with some of the folks that we've been talking about, like with the folks we've been calling scouts and the folks we've been calling subject matter experts, and even the folks that are very often middle management, and maybe like a VP of marketing or something like that I might be doing the project for, or somebody that reports up through the CFO that I might be doing the project for. I might be looking for fraudulent invoices. I was on a project related to that. But that's why I like low code, no code, so that it can be highly collaborative and everybody can understand what I'm doing, but I still play some role on that. It seems like when we talk about low code, no code, the experts supposedly all should be Python, because otherwise you're not serious. That's the sense that I always get. A real data scientist is always 100% Python. And then conceivably you have the SMEs working in a low code, no code tool. Where I start to get worried isn't that I'm trying to be fussy about the skill set about the SMEs. I hope it's become clear that I'm open to that. It's more that now we've got people working in two different tools and they're not talking to each other. I'd rather have everybody, including the so-called experts, using the low-code, no-code tool. Is that a completely rare take on this, or have you encountered that?
I have heard people talk about it with regard to data science, certainly, and not. I grew up on SPSS and SAS as well, and in fact, I paid my way through graduate school helping people who were not data scientists, even though that term didn't exist at the time, do their research analyses at Harvard with SPSS and SAS and BMDP too. I don't know if you remember that. That was biomedical program, another statistical package, and a little bit of Minitab. But now I think in data science, it's become this automated machine learning versus programming it yourself in Python. And I did a research project for Data Robot, which is a auto ML program, and was surprised to find out that the biggest objectors to it were data scientists, even though the ones who used it could dramatically improve their productivity. Their models don't fit any better than the ones that came up. Certainly it helps I think you can use Data Robot as a citizen data scientist, but I think you're better off, frankly, using it as a professional data scientist, because you're going to be presented with 10 different algorithm types, and if you don't have any idea what's the difference between them, even though you can see one fits better than the other, you don't know whether you should really adopt it or not. Everybody likes to show off, I guess, and say, these automated tools, they're not going to make me more productive. But they do, and it's crazy not to use them.
Yeah. I think our take is quite similar on that, and I absolutely am not surprised that you got pushback from expert level data scientists, basically like I would much rather, work in Python. But again, it's the communication breakdown that concerns me, that you end up with this wall between these two groups. You get almost a priesthood, using their, Python, and then you get. So that's what's concerned me possibly about some of the issues that we've been talking about today, is when it starts to separate and you have these two worlds. So you have the data scientists all working in Python, not necessarily communicating with other teams, which is frankly, it's just not good data science. But, like for instance, at Further, we always kick off with clients on what we call a discovery and design project, which the whole point of discovery and design is to talk to subject matter experts and end users and so on, right? But again, you can get this wall between the two groups. What's the equivalent of that in automation, Ian?
Same. Literally, in the earliest days of automation is nothing but using a third-party tool to configure automation scripts, and you could you could also build that in Python. Right. And so 10 years ago, when I was building my RPA consultancy, we would hire exclusively out of universities for kids who had gone through math or physics programs, because they were structured thinkers, hard workers, smart, didn't mind working all night long, and yet weren't computer science grads whose hammer was Python and everything. Everything needed Python to solve it. You could, but that was the root of the opportunity in the space as it was. If you asked IT to build something for you, you ended up on a roadmap that was 3 years long, and they were purists about it, and they were craftsmen in Python rather than solving your problem. And so I saw the same exact thing, that RPA was was thought of as less than the craftsman's answer to a problem, but it solved the problem, right? And so ultimately, you can hand carve a coffee table, or you can get one from IKEA. There are going to be a lot more IKEA tables. A lot more people can build them, and they serve a purpose for a much larger audience. And good luck carving your coffee table. It'll be great when it's done, I'm sure. But while you're working on it, we've built 50 over here.
Well, I think that problem is going to get even more pronounced as generative AI
Absolutely
takes over, and the people who program Python from scratch are going to become dinosaurs, basically. I mean, they already, most Python programmers now use code libraries and GitHub Copilot and so on, and it accelerates their productivity. Right now, it's the case that it helps, I think, more experienced developers than it does new developers, because mistakes happen and new developers don't really know exactly where the mistake has been made. But that's not going to last. Eventually, it'll do everything from start to finish better than a human.
Right. And this was, I was on stage last week talking about our book, and I made the comment that in the months that it was sort of being finalized and going to press, we watched just this absolute blossoming of generative technologies that can do so many powerful things that if we were to start writing it again today, citizen of any form are really supercharged with an incredible toolkit of capabilities that can take ideas that literally only need human language. It literally only depends on your ability to articulate what the need is, and it will start building it for you with, as Tom said, with everything from a generative tool to cursor to what is it, V0 from Vercel. All of these tools are magic. And what's more, it's turning not only domain experts internally into effectively developers of automations, applications, and data science models, but it's also turning people who are domain experts in a particular field into technical founders. It is creating a renaissance of entrepreneurial activity, because where your constraint before was, I don't know how to build the thing I see in my head, that is no longer an issue.
Thank God we didn't write this book in 2022.
Oh, God.
Really
That's right. That's
no generative AI.
How quaint.
Exactly. That's a nice segue to, I have a follow-up to ask first, but that's a nice segue, obviously, to our one of our remaining important topics, which is how Gen AI is affecting all of this. But first, at the risk that folks are less familiar with the citizen automation tools, I just want to briefly say that you've got things like Nime. I got my Nime coffee mug over here. Data Robot was mentioned. H2O.ai is another one of these low-code, no-code data science tools, which they have something like a dozen Kaggle grandmasters that they work with in designing their AutoML tools. So these are really sophisticated tools. Alteryx, of course, was already mentioned. Who am I forgetting? There's Gartner's identified 18 of them. And they look
all the super scalers have their versions of them too.
Oh, of course, yeah. All the cloud platforms have AutoML tools for sure. Ian, at the risk that folks might be a little bit less familiar with the equivalent in the automation world, what is it like using them?
Well, so in the automation world, you've got some of your traditional leaders in the space that have evolved and made themselves. And 10 years ago, they said that they were easier to use. They are now becoming easier to use. In fact, so the leaders there are UiPath is a clear one. Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism are still sort of there. There's a lot of upstarts and new companies, and again, just the ability to sort of generatively build capabilities is, I think, going to actually redefine this space as well. This the idea of agentics, which are discrete, capable automation bots that have some form of agency, although I think that's a bit strong. They aren't able to fully think for themselves, but they have some ability to be flexible and to interact with one another. that's going to define this automation space, and it's in flux right now. I mean, literally, just the word itself is in flux, and we're all trying to figure out what we mean by agentics and AI agents. But the next few months and years are going to be truly disruptive to the existing toolkit that we were used to using in the last few years.
We've got 5 minutes to go and 2 questions that I want to squeeze into that time, but very quick housekeeping. So, Marie, if you could, we'll just kind of announce the January topic and the February topic of this same series, if you could, Marie. Yeah, fantastic. So we're going to be talking about medical AI. Matt Lundgren, who was at Stanford for many years now at Microsoft, also Ian, a colleague of ours on the LinkedIn Learning side, fantastic course. And then in February, we're going to be talking to Olivia Gamblin, author of Responsible AI, which is a topic that we talk about pretty much daily at Further. So, gentlemen, back to you. Do want to get to this Gen AI part. So, obviously, I've already admitted that personally I'm a fan of these low-code, no-code tools, and I think they're really for everybody because they ease communication. So here's my concern with Gen AI. I mean, I know I've tried it. It's really remarkable. In fact, Tom, you might get a kick out of this. I wondered if ChatGPT was decent at writing SPSS syntax. It actually is. Does a pretty good job, right? Because I thought that maybe there wasn't as much attention on that, maybe now versus years ago, but it did a fine job.
And it probably converted into something newer, if you would like.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You could say, take my SPSS syntax from 1992 and turn it into Python. So my concern is that even though you can generate Python with natural language, it doesn't have that shareable quality that I was just describing, because you can't pass around the 2 pages of Python to everybody. I mean, I can read Python, but some of those same folks that we've been talking about, they might be able to generate it, but they can't read it. So I'm a bigger fan of low-code, no-code tools that are, because they're visual, everybody that's working together on the project can read it well. But if I had to place a bet on it, I would bet that Gen AI is going to win the day. What's your take?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Gen AI that enables group collaboration, like you just described, is not here quite yet. You can prompt yourself various things and share links, but collaborative discourse and engagement and design is on the horizon and probably coming soon. And I think that's going to define how teams work together. And as you said, I think generative is just, it's so straightforward, right? It lets you use whatever natural language you're most used to. And it's Esperanto. It is a universal translator. If you're a Python geek and that's the way you speak, fine. And I can translate it back to human and I can read it. And then I can outline and articulate sort of process specific pains or knowledge I know as more of a domain expert / scout. And it can convert it to something more technical for you to understand. And in the act of doing it, I think the chasm between us is closing, and we're learning how to communicate with each other more effectively, which will in turn greatly increase the likelihood that digital transformations actually succeed, because those chasms of communication were the reason they failed.
That is an interesting take, Ian, actually. That is a more optimistic take than mine, that maybe eventually you'll be able to ask ChatGPT, walk me through this Python that you just wrote for me. So
speak to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Tell me what this does. I use that prompt way more than I should admit.
Yeah. So we'll end on just one final question. And I want to remind everybody to please follow Further if you're not, so that you don't miss those January and February events that we just announced. Do either of you want to take a 1-minute version at the training that you think enterprises should be thinking about? I'm reminded of IADS, our friends over at the Initiative for Analysis of Data Science Standards, Tom, that I know you're particularly familiar with, and their Citizen and Citizen Plus and Citizen Squared concept. Who's doing the best job at training citizens these days, recognizing that they're out there and helping them out on the training side?
I certainly on the data science and automation side, I would vote for AT&T, which has large cadres of both types. Maybe they do citizen application development as well, but I don't know about that as much. But both in automation and data science, they have tons of capabilities to help out. They have tons of courses that they supply. They get people together in regular community gatherings to kind of share ideas. And now they're doing it with generative AI as well. So a really great example from my perspective.
Internally at Further, everyone takes a course before they get their Gen AI license. I imagine that that's an easy way to do it. And I know anecdotally about a big bank that happens to use NIME, the low-code tool that I was talking about, and they have a similar policy. They say, please use a tool like this for ETL, but just tell us that you're doing so and take a short class. And then
yeah, I think that's a good idea. I was talking to Colgate-Palmolive last week, and they do the same thing. You have to be certified before you get your keys to ChatGPT or whatever.
But since it's at the citizen level, we're not talking 6-month certification program. Like some of the cloud providers really have courses that take that long to complete. The one that I'm thinking of is 4 half days. So it's really quite reasonable, and folks don't have to wait forever to get that. Okay, gentlemen, I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much. So I want to encourage folks to. I will keep an eye on comments. I'm sure Tom and Ian will as well in the feed to follow up. Also, we love video clips here, so we'll have some clips go out and keep the conversation going related to that. So I hope everybody has a lovely holiday, and thanks again, Tom and Ian, for coming today.
Hey, thanks a million for having us.
And a nice endorsement from Phil there.
Yay. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.